Okay, welcome back. Today we're gonna do the recap of the game 5 of the Nepo versus Dink match. Have to say from the get-go, this was probably Nepo's masterpiece game of this match so far. Maybe it's probably one of his best games in the whole career as well. So let's start from the scratch. As we can see, the accuracy of this game by white is 95% versus black's 88%. 95% is huge, considering the scope, the length, and the complications in this game. All right, Spanish, our favorite openings we learned since we're kids, basically, or the beginners. We know that the Spanish game is the king of the strategic decision-making openings out there. Leads to quiet, solid, and very maneuvering type of positions. That's exactly what we got. Bishop e7, and we have d3. All right, d3 instead of rook e1. So what this move does, it moves away from the theory mainstream lines like rook e1, again, which leads into Marshall Gambit, and white wants to save the tempo for instead of playing rook e1, he can play something else. So b5, black still goes d6, still the same idea is to play knight a5 by protecting this pawn first, playing c5, c3, castles, this is all pretty well known, h3, bishop b7, or you can play knight a5, c5 immediately. Pretty sure this line was, but yes, we can see the difference. In the game, he plays bishop e7, but if you play knight a5 immediately, you force the bishop to c2, and then we sort of get, this will become a Chingorian position, but with the tempo down for white, because he already played d3. And probably that's not something that we're going to see in this game. It's probably going to be something like knight d2, although d4 still gives white certain small advantage. But black plays bishop b7 first, and after a4, I remember that, you know, I introduced the plan queen d7, knight d8, knight e6 into tournament practice when I played Garry Kasparov in Dos Hermanos event. Since then, this plan became also pretty popular. But knight a5, again, black follows just the main old sort of Chingorian guidelines. Except the difference here that white can move the bishop to a2. Obviously, the bishop on a2 is better placed than on c2 because, you know, he keeps an eye on this diagonal, keeps an eye on the central squares. Also, b4 is coming. All right, so okay, let's keep going. c5, main idea. And now we have bishop g5. Ideally, you know, this is exactly what white wants to do. If he wants to gain control of the d5 square, which is pretty much the standard idea for white in this line, given black's pawn structure here. Black has no way to take control of the square under control by any pawn anymore. But you can defend the square with the knight, with the bishop, potentially with the knight on e7. So, and white's bishop on c1 really doesn't have much any future. That's why bishop g5 is often played in such positions. You want to eliminate this defender, and in a close position where knights are very good because the bishops don't have any clear targets, then the knight will go to f1, e3, d5 and try to get control of this square. So black plays h6. It's been pretty well known also that black can try to go something like 98 or also 97 and try to keep this knight alive precisely for the reason so you can later try to keep an eye on this square and instead to give up this bishop. But you know, it was early development of this understanding of this structure, but later understanding came that after this trade, black can potentially play just g6, bishop g7, move the king and go for f5 and really ignore the square. So we'll see. White plays according to the first the first line in the computer is a b4 here, but white plays very slow positional chess, develops the knight, keeps the bishop on a2, it's a small, again, advantage for white, and it seems the question is like, why can't black just play d5, right? Seems very logical question. The only problem with this is that after the trades, for example, like this, white can now play either knight e4 immediately or queen e2, and then these pawns become sort of vulnerable, especially with the knight on a5. Although it is, I would say it's still possible for black to play something like this. And now either trade on e4 or play queen d6 and black is fine. And if you try to play b4 immediately, then black can just take on b4 and take on a4, which leads to total equality, of course. Even if you take, then it could be knight c6, and then just either grab or queen b6 immediately. Actually, black is fine. So in this case, d5 I think was pretty interesting alternative. So d5 was interesting. Again, maybe black was concerned that, again, after taking, you have knight e4, then you have to move the bishop, and then potentially you can play knight g3, but it should be okay for black. The engine gives this position very close to 0, which is equal position. Okay, in the game, Ding plays knight c6. He wants to bring the knight directly into the game immediately from the rim square. We all know that knight on the rim is pretty dim, but you know, white gets this d5 square under control, yeah? And that means that black cannot really get rid of this bishop very easily, compared to the line where we saw earlier where black plays d5 and pretty much equalized immediately. Now black is sort of suffering, starting to suffer a little bit. You can take this rook immediately, because after white queen takes, which happened in the game, play queen d7, and then rook retakes the file. Queen has nowhere to go on the a file, really. And queen protects the bishop, so black is ready to trade this annoying bishop. Still, black is no longer focused on the g6 f5 plan, and that means he'll be stuck with his bad bishop, and it means black is stuck in a passive position, which is exactly not what Ding excels at. So the opening battle, I would say a minor battle, was won by Nepo. He got a very comfortable position, very clear plan where his pieces are going. Black is stuck with the worst bishop, and this bishop will be traded as well, meaning that bad bishop versus good knight. Yeah, classic thing in chess. Nothing life-threatening advantage for white. It's a nagging small advantage, which this particular opening, the Spanish, is very famous for. It's been called Spanish torture for a reason. Okay, so rook a8, queen d1. Here, queen can go either to the king side or can go to the queen side. The rook has no infiltration square because this bishop hits every square under control. And now bishop d8. Again, it looks like a standard move for black, but it seems to make more sense to, again, play knight d8, knight e6, because knight on c6 is pretty bad. And then we have to think, where is the best square for this knight? So the knight can go either to g6, but if you put the knight on g6, then white can potentially play something like h4 and g3, and then this knight is bad, and you have to put him somewhere else again. And then after you consider this question, you realize that in the end, knight d8 and knight e6, this is the best square for the knight in the game. Because here the knight can go to f4, the knight controls d4 square, he can go to g5, he blocks this diagonal. It's a perfect square for the knight, actually. So knight d8 here in this position was very recommended. Instead, bishop d8, black gives still a more move. I mean, black gives time for white to stay for one more move with his bishop alive. White plays knight f1, and now he plays knight e7. So the idea is that black wants perhaps to put the bishop on b6 to stop white's d4 expansion, but white is not actually planning to play d4. Instead, he just takes, plays knight e3, and again, the problem is what to do with this bishop for black. You don't have d5, this pawn is hanging, but he plays bishop b6, and black probably prepares c4, because that's what he is going to play in the game. And he was also asking a question for white, like what is white's plan? Because white has this nice pair of knights. He has nice close position, a small claim to the square on d5, but we're still talking about the situation where both sides are basically playing on their own half of the board. Okay, white does not have any aggression planned yet. And this is the interesting moment, because Nepo now comes and plays the strategic idea, which is common in this position. It's to play h4, and then the threat is to play h5, which stops the black completely from playing f5. Or it could be g4, because the position is closed, and then knight goes to f5. And it's a prelude to the attack here on the king side. So let's see, queen c6, black is ready to play c4. If you play c4, then you open the bishop, you manage to hit these pawns, the knight sort of takes control of the square. It would be very nice if the knight was on f6 instead, because then he'll be also hitting the pawn, but the knight is on e7, and that's what we work with. h5, c4, and this is probably the first critical moment of the game. White has to make a decision now. He plays d4, decides to close the position. The other way to play this position was to play something like knight c2, allow the pawn trade, and then this position is this pawn structure, like this, pawns b5, d6, e5, versus white's b2, c3, e4, is a very standard structure in the Sicilian Najdorf or Sveshnikov, except that the bishop is already on b6 in a pretty good spot. So I think Nepo's decision to play d4 is on point. He keeps this bishop locked because you want to keep your opponent pieces from playing in optimal places. The pawn is protected indirectly. So black takes on e4, knight takes c4, attacks the queen, attacks the bishop, and then you trade the bishop and take the pawn on e5. If black takes on d4, then knight d4, and again you cannot take the pawn because of knight f5, winning the piece. But now black is stuck with two weaknesses, so black can't really do that unless he comes up with a good space for the queen to go. Still, I think this was probably inaccurate. Probably Dink really misjudged a little bit his opponent's play, but after the capture on d4, white's pieces are activated really well. So the computer suggests rook d8, keeping the center at status quo. You need this pawn on a5 because white knights, they're still not quite there yet, in dangerous spaces, I mean. So, but after capturing and playing queen c5, the evaluation actually jumps pretty large. The computer suggests to keep the queen on b7 on this diagonal, indirectly protecting the pawn because of the pin, and also keeping an eye on this pawn on e4. In the game, plays queen c5, small inaccuracy. Why? It's not so obvious, but my guess is that queen sort of prevents the bishop from doing his best part, and also queen, where does it go, right? The only way for the queen to go is to go to e5 or g5 to continue this thinking, but white just plays queen g4. Probably what was even better, according to the engine, is to play queen f3 with the threat of e5, hitting the rook. And that way you also keep an option of playing knight f5 because you protect this pawn. And then white's advantage is kind of large because if black moves the rook, let's say for example rook e8, and now you can play queen g4 because you have a tempo where you attack the rook. So in the game he plays queen g4. It's a small inaccuracy by white. But after queen e5, knight f3, interestingly enough, is not the first choice of the engine. The first choice is queen d7, but knight f3 is a very human move because you want to put the knight on f5. If you put the knight on f5 instead, then black just takes, and king h7, and now his bishop is open. All mates are protected. White can play this, but then black counterattacks with rook a2, and suddenly, you know, it is black who is better in this position. So knight f3, very human move. The engine move queen d7, very interesting. We should probably take a look at it. Black has to take, queen e4, then f3, queen e6, and normally you would want to take on b7, but that leads to a lot of complications. So the first line is actually queen b7. Yeah, normally you want to take on b5 this pawn. But again, even black just plays this and plays rook c8. This looks very close to equal position. So I like Nepo's choice. He had the long thing here by this time. So he plays knight f3, and he keeps the knights alive. And after queen e6, knight f5. Very interesting decision, because black is forced to take on f5. There is no other way about it. And after e takes f5, we have an extremely interesting structure. White purposefully double his own pawns, open the black bishop. However, this pawn on f5 creates huge mating threats thanks to this f6 move. And that means black has to juggle now and do a serious decision where the queen should go. In the game he went queen f6. It's a safe move, but it's also a very bad strategic move, because here queen is completely misplaced and sort of removed from the game. Instead, black had to play queen d7, then transfer the bishop back to f6 square, where he will be protecting critical squares. He'll be protecting the king, and he'll be also looking to help the push the pawn, which would allow the game to be you know, equal. Instead, queen f6, and after queen e4, a fantastic move by Nepo. He feels these positions because he played the Scotch game for a very, very long time. So those pawn structures, every little change in the pawn structure, every little change, that nuance, you know, Nepo feels really well, thanks to his experience by playing the Scotch opening. Here, again, he immediately takes charge of the square on d5, where white will control a lot of light squares, attack these two pawns, and potentially threaten rook e8. Centralized queen on d5 is actually a very scary thing. Rook b8. The reason is you cannot play rook here because of check, and queen takes b5. So he wants to protect the pawn. But now rook e2. And then the question is, why would the rook go to e2? It looks very obscure, yeah? Why not just play rook d1? And the rook on d1 does absolutely nothing. And second of all, black is ready to play b4 and go into mass exchanges, which lead into a draw. Okay? If you play queen d5, it's the same thing. Black is ready to play b4 and ready to trade everything. But rook e2 stops this, because after b4 you can just take this pawn, and this pawn is protected, and this pawn is now under attack, and white just gets an extra pawn. So black plays bishop c5, and we have second important move of the game, which is g4. The pawn not only gives white king a luft, but it also connects these other two pawns and allows white queen to move away from protection business. Yeah? So black's b4 plan is blunted. He has no active counterplay. Queen is seriously sidelined. Advantage white. And this advantage is not just advantage, it's like really, really nagging and huge advantage for white, where he wants now to simply improve his pieces even further. Ideally, you want this knight on e4, because he will be attacking queen, pawn, bishop, and helping play f6. So let's see how Nepo achieves this goal of moving this knight here. So queen d8, black is trying to improve his queen. Second threat is main d5, so queen d5. King f8 is kind of a little bit weird. At this point, the engine suggests just giving away this pawn, but as long as you trade the other pawns and your rook gets active, and you can move your queen and create some pinnings for the white king. But king f8. For now, Ding is playing pure defense, and this is very instructive, really. Like, we looked at the game 4, which Ding white was white, and remember how he completely outplayed and paralyzed Nepo after the exchange sacrifice on d4, how his knight infiltrated and with those central pawns, all Nepo's 2 rooks and queen, they look so helpless. This is exactly the opposite in this game. I think the previous game really made Nepo very, very upset, and now he wants to demonstrate that he can play this dominating chess himself. So king f8, Dink trying to do passive defense and see how white wants to improve the position. King f1, king g2 is also possible, but white doesn't want to commit his king yet. So rook c8, again, probably not the greatest move. I think most of the grandmasters would consider queen c8 here with the idea of removing this queen from power. But that means you have to be ready for f6 with the threat of rook e7, forcing the trade, and then potentially queen e4, knight h4, knight f5. This is the price black has to pay for removing control over the square. But he plays rook c8, he just basically stands, and it's not a very fortunate move because Nepo finds the best move in the game here. We talked earlier how the knight should be really going here, but thanks to this location of queen, knight and rook, while black is hopeless with his bishop, rook is very passive and very passive queen, Nepo hits on this incredible idea, which is to go for the pawn break, g5 followed by rook g4, and if f6 there is an absolutely crazy idea which we'll mention. So rook b8, g5, yeah, g5 takes, rook g4, f6, and Dink realizes that if he plays f6 here, Nepo has this absolutely amazing idea to play knight h4, and thanks to this queen taking care of these squares, knight g6 is a threat black cannot refuse, so he must accept this sacrifice. But after h6, if you take with the pawn, it's made in 2, and if you play g5, it's fg6, again a wonderful positional sacrifice of the knight. These pawns are now unstoppable, and as we can see, the bishop on c5 is completely sidelined. He's doing absolutely nothing, and he cannot protect black king, which is why when we mentioned earlier the bishop really should have gone back to d8 to f6. There he would make a great difference in defense. So Dink sees this line, he plays rook a8, but unfortunately white's position is very, very strong. Knight g5, check, and king e2. White avoids this king g2, queen a8, queen trade, although this is also completely winning thanks to this idea to play f6. And the black takes, there is check, rook e4, check, king d7, and again bishop is unable to help black completely on the king side. White pawn moves, and once the pawn moves to h7, it threatens knight g8, and then either king comes or the rook comes to g4, g8, or rook e8, and white wins the game. Okay, so but Nepo just wants to be super careful. He wants to leave black absolutely zero chance of survival. He plays this move, no queens exchange is allowed. Still there is a threat of mate, a threat of knight h7, f6, queen e7 is forced, and now knight e4, and black is officially lost now, because there is no defense against threats like f6, h6, h7, and if you play something like rook h1, then it's f6 and check on g8, winning the queen. So again, thanks to this powerful combination of queen, rook and knight, with the really bad bishop on c5, white is winning the game. So Dink plays a couple more moves just to see the final finish of the game. King f3, white is not rushing, he just removed himself from the pin. Now the knight can move again. Queen a8, trades, f6, just as we spoke, and black is stuck with his pawn. He plays g6, but after the trade, rook g6 again. The knight, pawn, and rook, they're in perfect harmony, and the mate is coming. King g, white king joins the attack. king goes to f5 to e6, also helps protect the pawn. And black had enough and he resigned the game because there's actually mate coming. And the mate is rook h8, king f7, king f5, and knight g5 mate. And again, this bishop is the root cause of all black's problems in this game. Absolutely masterful game by Nepo, demonstrating standard Spanish opening ideas, but also creating this new sort of structural threat for black, strategic threat in this position by playing knight f5, creating this very dangerous pawn on f5. Thanks to this pawn on h5, the f6 becomes real threat because black has no g6. And thanks to this trade, white managed to gain control of the critical opening squares d5 and e4 for his pieces, while black misjudged the danger and he kept the bishop on the active diagonal while he should have switched to the defensive diagonal. And once white found the idea of g5 and rook g4, opening the position on the king side, black is lost. Absolutely incredible performance and a perfect answer by Nepo for the loss in his previous game. So the ball is now in the Ding's court to demonstrate if he can strike back again and equalize the score. So tomorrow will be a very interesting game, and we look forward I look forward to doing another recap and sharing my thoughts with you guys. If you like the video, please, again, click the subscribe, leave some comments, and I'll see you soon, my friends. Good night.